Michael stared out the kitchen window, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the sink. The coffee he'd made was cold now, untouched for the past hour, but he couldn't bring himself to lift the cup. Outside, the sun was rising over the suburban neighborhood that once felt like a safe haven. But after everything that had happened, after the pain, the silence, the mocking smiles from across the street, it now felt like a prison made of white fences and lies. Across the cul-de-sac, Karen Mitchell stood on her porch with her arms folded and that smug smirk painted across her face. Michael could see her clearly, dressed in her pastel pink robe like the queen of some twisted kingdom. And next to him, in her wheelchair, Lily sat quietly, staring into her lap, fingers nervously fiddling with the charm bracelet he'd given her last Christmas. She didn't say a word. She hadn't said much in days. It all started with the noise complaint. That's what Karen had called it. Just a concerned neighbor reporting unusual activity. But the truth was uglier. Karen had always eyed Lily with discomfort, her subtle glances turning into sharp comments. "It's so sad," she once told another neighbor, loud enough for Michael to hear. "Some kids are just broken from the beginning." That day, Michael had clenched his fists so tightly he drew blood from his palm. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Not until it started getting worse. Lily was a fighter. At just 11 years old, she had already endured more surgeries than most adults do in a lifetime. A car accident when she was 3, caused by a drunk driver, had left her partially paralyzed. Her legs never regained full function, and most days she relied on her wheelchair. But even in that chair, she sparkled. Her drawings, her laugh, her courage, they lit up the darkest rooms. And Michael swore he'd protect her no matter what, even from people like Karen. Karen, who lived 2 doors down, had always pretended to be a sweet Christian lady, the type who baked pies and hosted book clubs. But underneath it all, there was something cold and cruel. It wasn't just her words. It was how she looked at Lily, like she wasn't human, like she didn't belong. And when Lily accidentally rolled across Karen's lawn one afternoon on her way home from school, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Karen screamed, literally screamed at her. "Get that thing off my grass," she shrieked. Michael ran out in disbelief, and Karen, ever the actress, pretended like nothing happened. "I just get so emotional," she said later with crocodile tears. "I thought she was going to damage my landscaping." But that wasn't the end. Karen began filing reports. First to the HOA, then to the city. She claimed Lily was a disturbance, that her wheelchair was too loud, that Michael was harboring a health hazard. Then came the accusations, completely fabricated, that Michael was abusing his daughter. Child Protective Services showed up one morning unannounced. Michael stood frozen in the doorway as they entered his home, as Lily cried in confusion, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The caseworker found nothing. No bruises, no signs of neglect, nothing but a meticulously clean home and a father who was clearly doing everything he could. But the damage had been done. The whispers started in the neighborhood. People pulled their children away when Lily passed by. Friends stopped visiting. It was as if Karen's poison had soaked into the entire block. Michael tried going to the police, but every complaint he made was dismissed as a neighborly dispute. Karen, with her pristine home and volunteer work at the church, was believed. He, a single father raising a disabled child, was questioned. His frustration grew into rage, and yet he held it in for Lily. Always for Lily. And then, one day, it escalated beyond anything he had imagined. It was early spring. Lily had just started using her crutches again for short walks inside the house. She was so proud. "I want to surprise you," she told Michael with a cheeky grin. He didn't know what she meant at first. Later, he realized she'd meant walking unaided for just a few steps on her birthday. That afternoon, she was practicing in the garage while Michael worked in the yard. And that's when Karen showed up. She stormed across the street, red in the face, and started yelling at Lily. Michael heard the shouting and ran toward the noise, just in time to see Karen snatch the crutches from Lily's hands. "You people are such a nuisance," she screamed. "Your freak child is lowering property value." Michael's body froze in horror as Lily fell hard onto the concrete, scraping her face and hands. Blood stained her little white dress. And Karen? Karen just stood there, laughing like it was a joke, like none of it mattered. That was the day Michael lost control. He didn't touch Karen, though God knows he wanted to. He called the police again. He documented everything. He took photos, filed a formal report. But Karen, ever the manipulator, twisted it all. She claimed Lily lunged at her with a metal stick, that Michael threatened her life, and somehow, some way, the system bent in her favor again. The court summons arrived 2 weeks later. Michael sat in silence for nearly an hour after opening the letter. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just sat there numb, staring at the words, "Protective order hearing, Mitchell versus Carson." Karen was trying to get a restraining order. Against him. Against Lily. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He watched Lily as she slept, her face bandaged, soft breathing echoing in the room like a fragile promise. She didn't deserve this. None of it. And he knew that if he lost this case, it wouldn't just be about legal papers. It would give Karen power. It would silence them both. And it might destroy Lily's spirit for good. The next morning, he hired Mr. Jacobs, a former prosecutor known for taking on impossible cases. Jacobs listened, quietly took notes, and then leaned forward. "You have something they don't," he said. "Truth. But it's going to take more than truth to beat someone like her. We need impact. We need to show that courtroom exactly who your daughter is and what this woman's done." And so they prepared. They gathered every report, every photo, every witness they could. A former nanny, the CPS caseworker, even Lily's physical therapist. Each one told the same story. Michael was a loving, devoted father. Lily was a bright, kind child. And Karen? Karen was a ticking time bomb. Still, as the hearing date approached, Michael could feel the weight pressing down on him. The neighborhood avoided him like he was contagious. Someone even spray-painted "liar" on his garage door one night. He scrubbed it clean before Lily saw it. He didn't want her to know how ugly people could be. And then came the final blow, the deposition. Karen showed up dressed like she was attending a charity gala, pearls, heels, soft makeup. She smiled for the cameras outside the courthouse. And inside, during questioning, she laughed. She laughed when asked about the incident in the garage. She denied everything, called Lily unpredictable, claimed Michael was unstable and militant, and when Jacobs pushed her on the specifics, Karen snapped back with a chilling grin. "I'm not afraid of them. The court will see what kind of people they really are." Michael clenched his jaw. Lily was waiting just outside the room, holding her mother's old scarf like a shield. She didn't deserve to hear this. And that night, for the first time in weeks, she asked a question. "Daddy, am I the reason people hate us?" Michael broke. His heart shattered into pieces that could never fully be mended. He dropped to his knees, hugged her tight, and whispered, "No, sweetheart, they hate what they don't understand. But you are the reason I keep fighting." The morning of the hearing, it rained. Dark skies loomed overhead like a warning. Michael dressed Lily in her best, a light blue dress. Her hair tied in a neat ponytail, the charm bracelet jingling softly on her wrist. She looked small, too small to be carrying the weight of this world. As they approached the courthouse, cameras flashed. Karen was already there, standing beside her lawyer, laughing again, like she'd already won. But Michael didn't flinch. He held Lily's hand and stepped forward. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was war. The morning sun tried to break through the gray clouds, casting a soft golden hue on the courthouse steps. Michael could feel it warming his neck as he adjusted the collar of his shirt. He didn't feel ready, not for what lay ahead, not for what his daughter was about to do. No father ever is. Beside him, Lily sat silently in her wheelchair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, a soft green ribbon in her hair. The charm bracelet on her wrist jingled faintly each time her hand trembled, but she wasn't shaking out of fear. She was waiting, focused, composed, determined in a way that stunned even Michael. Inside the courthouse, Whispers rippled through the gallery the moment they entered. Reporters had gotten wind of the case overnight after someone leaked the video footage of Karen snatching the crutches. Now, journalists lined the hallway. People Michael had never seen before sat on the benches, some looking curious, some quietly outraged, and a few with tears in their eyes. Michael pushed Lily slowly toward the courtroom door. She didn't flinch as they passed Karen and Ms. Burns, who both stood confidently with their heads held high. Look at her pretending to be brave. Karen hissed under her breath, just loud enough for Michael to hear. She'll fall apart up there. Michael didn't respond. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Once inside, Judge Reynolds took the bench and adjusted his glasses. He scanned the room, then sighed. "Let's finish this today," he said, tapping the gavel once. "But let me be clear, I will not tolerate drama, theatrics, or mockery in this courtroom. This is a space for facts." Mr. Jacobs rose slowly. "Your Honor, we would like to call a witness, one we initially did not plan to bring to the stand, the minor herself." A low murmur buzzed through the courtroom. Burns jumped to her feet. "Objection. The child is clearly under stress. This is a manipulative stunt. She shouldn't be subjected." Reynolds cut her off. "Ms. Burns, I'll be the judge of what is or isn't appropriate. Unless you have evidence this child is incompetent to speak, I will allow it." Burns sat back down, seething. Karen, however, leaned forward with an amused smirk, like she was waiting to be entertained. Michael wheeled Lily to the front. She didn't look at Karen. She didn't look at the crowd. Her eyes stayed locked on Judge Reynolds. The bailiff stepped forward. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Lily nodded. "I do." Her voice was small, but clear. Jacobs approached slowly. "Lily, would you please tell the court your name and age?" "Lily Carson. I'm 11. Do you know why you're here today?" "Yes," she said. "Because that woman," she pointed directly at Karen, "hurt me, and then lied about it." A shocked silence fell over the courtroom. Karen scoffed loudly, but Judge Reynolds didn't scold Lily. Instead, he nodded slightly, letting her continue. Jacobs took a step back. "Tell the court what happened, Lily, in your own words." Lily inhaled deeply. "I was in the garage, practicing walking. My dad didn't know because I wanted it to be a surprise for my birthday. I had been doing extra therapy. I could take 4 steps on my own. That day I thought maybe I could do 6. Her voice quivered, but she didn't look down. Then I heard yelling. It was Miss Karen. She said I was loud. She said I was ruining her day. She walked into the garage and took my crutches. I asked her to stop. She said something about me being a freak. Then she pulled the crutches away." Jacobs didn't interrupt. "I fell." Lily continued, her fingers gripping the armrests. "I hit my face. I couldn't move." And she laughed. I remember her walking away like she won something." Michael's throat tightened. Even Jacobs took a moment before asking the next question. "Have you ever done anything to hurt her? Ever threatened her?" Lily shook her head. "No, I try not to go near her house. But she always finds a way to yell at me. She called me names. She made me feel like I didn't belong in the neighborhood." Karen's lawyer jumped to her feet again. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation." Judge Reynolds raised a hand. "Sit down, Ms. Burns. The child is answering truthfully and calmly. Continue, Ms. Carson." Lily looked directly at Karen for the first time. "You thought I wouldn't speak because I'm small. Because I'm different. But I'm not afraid of you anymore." Karen's face darkened. Reynolds looked at Jacobs. "Anything else?" "No, Your Honor. Lily's testimony speaks for itself." Burns rose, trying to recover. "Lily," she said with a forced smile, "isn't it true you fell because you were trying something dangerous?" "No," Lily replied. "But your legs, your medical records say—" "My legs are weak," Lily said, "but my memory isn't—" A few people in the gallery gasped softly. Karen's smirk had vanished. Burns sat down quickly. The judge leaned forward, taking off his glasses. "Thank you, Lily. You may step down." Michael rolled her back toward their table. As he passed Karen, she didn't meet his eyes. Her hands were clenched, her skin pale. Then Jacobs called the final witness. Detective Carla Monroe, a no-nonsense, middle-aged officer with a long record of domestic abuse cases. She had reviewed Karen's complaint history, not just against the Carsons, but against several others in the neighborhood. Jacobs handed her a file. Detective, how many complaints has Ms. Mitchell filed in the last 2 years? 17, Monroe answered. Only 3 were found to have any legitimacy, and none resulted in charges. And what was the pattern? She often targeted families with young children, minorities, single parents. Jacobs paused. Would you describe her complaints as racially or socially motivated? Burns objected. The judge overruled. Yes, Monroe said. In several interviews, neighbors mentioned discriminatory language, including comments about disabled individuals being bad for the community's image. The court shifted. People were whispering again. A woman in the back row quietly wiped a tear. Finally, Jacobs returned to the defense table. Your Honor, we rest our case. Reynolds leaned back, steepling his fingers. Very well. This court will take a recess. When we return, I will deliver my decision. The room slowly emptied. Michael and Lily sat together in silence. She reached over, took his hand, and held it. Karen stood alone in a corner, her lawyer whispering something quickly and harshly. Her face had gone completely blank. 30 minutes later, the courtroom reconvened. Reynolds returned with a folder in hand. He looked across the room, slowly, deliberately. This case has left me with a deep pit in my stomach, he began, not because the facts were unclear, but because they were too clear. I have reviewed the video, the testimonies, and the documented history of both parties, and I am deeply disturbed. Michael exhaled. Ms. Mitchell, the judge continued, your behavior reflects a pattern of targeted hostility toward a child whose only crime was existing in a way that challenged your warped idea of order. Karen's mouth twitched. Her lawyer whispered frantically again. Your request for a restraining order is denied. Furthermore, this court is referring the matter to the district attorney's office for review under child endangerment and harassment statutes. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Karen blinked rapidly. Reynolds turned to Michael. Mr. Carson, I commend your restraint, your documentation, and your commitment to your daughter's dignity. You've done more than most would under the same pressure. And to young Lily Carson, I owe you an apology on behalf of every adult who failed to protect you sooner. Michael's vision blurred. He reached for Lily's hand. She was crying now, but smiling. Reynolds slammed the gavel. This court is adjourned. Karen stood in stunned silence as officers stepped forward. One of them quietly asked her to follow for questioning. She tried to protest, but her voice cracked and her knees buckled as she sat down instead. Outside the courthouse, the air felt new, light, cleansed. People were applauding. Not for Michael, not for the lawyers, but for Lily. She waved shyly, and a woman handed her a rose. Michael knelt beside her. You were amazing. She looked at him, her voice soft. Do you think people believe me now? Michael smiled through his tears. They will. But even if they don't, I always will. And with that, the world began to turn again, not because justice had been perfect, but because truth had finally spoken through the quietest voice in the room. The buzz outside the courthouse had only grown louder by the time Michael pulled his car around the back entrance. News vans lined the front sidewalk. People with protest signs had started gathering by the gate, not angry protesters, but supporters, strangers, parents, people who had seen the leaked courtroom video and read the headlines that now splashed across local papers and Facebook feeds. Disabled girl testifies against neighbor. Courtroom turns after child speaks out. And one that made Michael pause for breath. My legs are weak, but my memory isn't. That line had become a rallying cry. Lily was inside the car with him, sipping from a juice box and swinging her feet slightly beneath her wheelchair's footrests. Her legs were still stiff, her back still sore, but her eyes were brighter than he had seen in months. She knew today mattered, not just to her or to Michael, but to everyone watching. Today wasn't about Karen anymore. Today was about standing back up in every possible way. Michael helped her out of the car and placed the small foldable walker beside her. He didn't tell her what to do. He never had to. She reached for it herself. Inside the building, an officer nodded respectfully and held the door open. Lily leaned forward, steadied herself with the walker, and took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3 steps. She didn't stop. Michael stayed right behind her, silently watching history being written one step at a time. The hallway that led to the courtroom was long, but Lily didn't flinch. Each footfall echoed like a drumbeat of defiance. People on the benches stood as she passed. Some clapped softly. One elderly woman bowed her head, tears in her eyes. Michael followed, his hands shaking not with fear but awe. By the time they reached the door, even the bailiff's face had softened. He didn't announce them this time. He didn't need to. Every single person in that room turned on instinct as the doors creaked open and the small figure of Lily Carson appeared, walking slowly but upright on her own with the walker. Karen had been smiling seconds earlier, seated comfortably next to Ms. Burns. But her expression froze. Her jaw went slack. She watched in stunned disbelief as Lily crossed the courtroom floor, step by step, like the ghost of every lie Karen had ever told. Lily made it to the witness box. She didn't need help climbing in. She handed the walker off to the bailiff and sat tall, her chin lifted slightly. Judge Reynolds blinked, visibly moved. "Miss Carson, are you sure you want to speak again?" Lily nodded. "I have something else to say." Jacobs didn't even rise. He sat still, letting her own voice command the room. "I told you yesterday what she did," Lily said softly. "But I didn't tell you what it meant." Karen shifted in her seat, suddenly fidgeting. The gallery was dead silent. "I used to think I wasn't good enough," Lily continued, "that I was broken, that the way people stared meant I didn't belong anywhere. Then I thought maybe if I was quiet enough, polite enough, small enough, people like her would stop. But they didn't. She didn't." Lily turned her head and looked directly at Karen. "You pushed me. You laughed. You told people I was dangerous. But I'm not the one who lied. I'm not the one who's afraid. You are." Karen looked down at her lap. Her lawyer tried to reach over and whisper something, but Karen batted her hand away. "I learned something," Lily said, her voice rising just enough. "People like you want kids like me to disappear. But I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not sorry for being seen." The room was still as stone. Even Judge Reynolds looked like he'd forgotten to breathe. Then Lily slowly stood again, placed her hands on the witness box edge, and carefully stepped down. She took her walker back from the bailiff, turned around, and walked right past Karen's table without flinching. Karen didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. The weight of the moment had crushed whatever cold confidence she'd built. Her smirk was gone, her courtroom theatrics over. Michael joined his daughter at their table, kneeling beside her. "You were brilliant," he whispered, and then the judge spoke. "I've seen many things in my years on this bench," Reynolds began, "but few that cut through legal procedure and expose the core of human dignity as sharply as what I've witnessed today." He took a deep breath. "I have reviewed every piece of evidence, every prior record, and every submitted testimony. I find without hesitation that the claims made by Ms. Mitchell are not only false but malicious. This court is issuing a full restraining order against Ms. Mitchell in favor of both Michael and Lily Carson." Karen looked up sharply. "In addition," Reynolds continued, "I am formally recommending the district attorney pursue charges for perjury, harassment, and child endangerment. And due to your prior pattern of unfounded complaints against neighbors, I am ordering a psychological evaluation before you may file any further civil petitions in this jurisdiction." Karen's eyes widened. "This is absurd. She's manipulating you. She's—" "Sit down, Ms. Mitchell," Reynolds said, his voice like iron. Karen sat. The judge looked back to Lily. "You walked in here today with more courage than most adults I've seen. You reminded us all why courts exist, to protect the truth, even when it comes from the smallest voice in the room." Then he turned to the bailiff. "Take Ms. Mitchell into custody for questioning regarding the garage incident. We're not done here." The clink of handcuffs followed moments later. Karen's mouth opened in shock as she stood, frozen. "You can't do this to me. I'm not the bad guy. I'm the victim." She twisted toward Lily. "This isn't over," she hissed. But Lily stood up and stared at her one last time, voice steady. "Yes, it is." Outside the courthouse, cheers erupted. A crowd of supporters had gathered with signs that read, "We stand with Lily, justice for all kids," and "Silence is not strength, courage is." The media surged forward, but Michael raised a hand. "No questions today." Lily, holding his hand tightly, leaned into the mic when a reporter asked her how she felt. "I feel free," she said, and ready to walk forward. 6 months later, the Carson family no longer lived in that neighborhood. They had moved across town to a quieter area, closer to Lily's physical therapy center. She had a new school, new friends, and a fresh start. She still used her wheelchair some days, but more often than not, she chose her walker. She kept her court testimony framed above her desk, not for vanity, but as a reminder that even when your legs shake, you can still stand for something. Karen was later charged with obstruction of justice, false reporting, and child endangerment. She pled not guilty, but her trial was still pending. Her image had changed overnight from respectable suburbanite to internet villain. Michael sometimes read the old headlines, still stunned by how everything had changed, but none of it compared to what he saw every morning. His daughter, stronger every day, walking one determined step at a time. Michael sat still at the defendant's table, gripping the edge with both hands, as if the polished wood might be the only thing anchoring him to the moment. The courtroom wasn't grand, but the tension inside made it feel enormous. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, and outside the tall, narrow windows, storm clouds loomed in silence. Karen sat on the other side, her posture perfectly composed, legs crossed, blazer crisp. Her blonde hair was pinned in a neat bun, a strand artfully falling over her left eye like she were posing for a magazine cover. She didn't look like a neighbor from hell. She looked like a woman about to win. Beside her sat Ms. Burns, her lawyer, young, aggressive, and theatrical. The type who didn't hesitate to twist a truth if it meant bending it far enough to draw blood. And beside Michael, with a stack of files, binders, and carefully compiled exhibits, sat Mr. Jacobs, whose calm voice and hawk-like precision had already earned him grudging respect from the judge. But all the calm in the world couldn't erase what was at stake. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. Judge Reynolds, a seasoned man in his late 60s with a furrowed brow and tired eyes, entered and gave both parties a brief glance before settling behind the bench. "Let's keep this civil," he said. "This isn't a circus." Michael's heart pounded harder. Opening statements began. Ms. Burns stood, heels clicking against the floor, and launched into a carefully rehearsed speech about ongoing harassment, property destruction, and an emotionally unstable man using his daughter as a tool of manipulation. She never once said Lily's name. She only referred to her as the child or the alleged disabled minor. Karen sat behind her, nodding gently, as if grieving some tragic misunderstanding rather than being the architect of it. "She has been subject to months of torment," Burns declared, gesturing to Karen like a victim of war. "My client has had to change her routine, live in fear, and endure constant disruption to her peace. And while we have nothing but sympathy for the child's condition, this case isn't about pity, it's about safety." Michael felt something crawl under his skin. Sympathy, that word, it was always used like a mask, a soft cover for cruelty. When Mr. Jacobs rose to deliver their statement, his tone was more direct. "This case," he said slowly, "is about a neighbor who targeted a disabled child because she thought she could get away with it." Karen rolled her eyes, but Judge Reynolds raised a hand. "I'll be the one to decide what this case is about." And so the testimony began. Karen took the stand first. She walked slowly, like she were recovering from trauma, and sat down with a dramatic sigh. The court clerk swore her in, and Ms. Burns guided her through a narrative so fictional Michael couldn't believe it was happening in a room sworn to truth. "Can you tell us about the first incident?" Burns asked. Karen took a breath. "It started last year. I noticed loud noises late at night, sometimes wheels scraping down the sidewalk. crying, screaming. I thought maybe something was wrong in their home. I tried to be helpful. I knocked on the door. I asked if everything was okay, but Mr. Carson, he shouted at me. He told me to mind my own business. I was scared, especially for the girl. Michael's knuckles whitened. That never happened. And what happened after that? Karen paused, wiping away a fake tear. Well, things got worse. The child would be on my lawn. I have photos. I didn't know what she was capable of. One time she had a stick, like a weapon. I thought she might hit me. Michael's mouth opened slightly. The stick was her crutch. Ms. Burns continued. And did you feel threatened by Mr. Carson? Karen nodded solemnly. Yes, he yelled. He would stand outside his house and stare at me. Intimidating. Once he followed me to my mailbox. I feared for my life. Michael looked to Judge Reynolds, waiting for any sign that he could see through this, but the judge's expression remained neutral. Jacobs leaned over. She's baiting. Let her burn through her lies. We'll dismantle them. Over the next hour, Karen continued her performance. She described Lily as emotionally volatile, unpredictable, and possibly violent. She made it sound like Lily was some kind of teenage delinquent rather than an 11-year-old with limited mobility and more grace than anyone in that courtroom. Then came the so-called incident in the garage. She lunged at me, Karen said, hand on her chest. She had this rod in her hand, and I just reacted. I pushed it away. I didn't mean for her to fall. It happened so fast. She left out the part where she yanked the crutches away, left out the screaming, the laughing, the blood. Michael had to bite his tongue. His eyes fell on Lily, sitting quietly behind them with her school counselor. Her tiny hands were folded in her lap. Her legs trembled lightly, not from fear but the cold. She looked at her father and offered a tiny nod, a reminder that she believed in him. When Karen stepped down, Ms. Burns presented several printed photos. Lily's wheelchair just off the sidewalk, a garbage bag tipped over near Karen's mailbox, one image of Michael standing on his porch, looking across the street. Intimidation, Burns claimed. Then came their first real weapon, the CPS report. Michael's breath caught. The agency had visited. They'd found no abuse, no signs of harm. But they had written a line that now filled the room like a foul odor. Subject demonstrates signs of emotional distress and isolation. Burns pointed to it. There, proof that the child may be unsafe. But Jacob stood immediately. Let's read the whole sentence, shall we? He walked toward the screen, tapped the paragraph. It continues, this appears to be the result of external social exclusion. There is no evidence of abuse or neglect by the parent. He turned to the judge. Let's not weaponize a child's emotional pain to defend the person who caused it. Judge Reynolds said nothing. The first witness Jacobs called was Mrs. Edmonds, the school bus driver. She recounted how Karen had yelled at Lily for accidentally rolling onto the grass. I remember thinking, what kind of adult says that to a child in a wheelchair? Then came Alicia, the physical therapist. She testified about Lily's slow, painful progress, about how she was starting to walk with braces before the garage incident. After that fall, she regressed. Emotionally, physically. We had to start over. Michael's stomach turned. Karen was scribbling on a notepad, expression tight. Burns tried objecting, claiming irrelevant medical opinions, but the judge allowed it. And then came the video. Michael didn't know the neighbor across the street had a doorbell cam. But Mr. Tanner, a retired vet, had captured the entire garage incident. Not perfectly, no audio, but enough to show Karen yanking the crutches, Lily falling, and Karen turning away while laughing. The courtroom went quiet. Karen's lawyer objected furiously, claimed privacy violations, claimed context was missing. But the judge allowed it, only after verifying timestamp and source. When the footage ended, Jacobs didn't even need to say anything. The image of Karen smiling while a disabled child bled on the floor said it all. Still, the defense fought back. They brought in a local HOA member who Karen had manipulated, a man named Dennis Wells, who claimed Michael was confrontational. But under Jacobs' cross-examination, Wells admitted he'd never actually seen Michael yell or threaten anyone. Karen told me, he mumbled. Piece by piece, the wall of lies cracked. But not enough. Not yet. And that's when Jacobs turned to Michael. The father took the stand, and for a moment, the courtroom blurred. The lights felt too bright, the judge's eyes too distant. But Michael focused on Lily. Her smile, her strength. He spoke with calm, broken grace. He told them about the accident when Lily was 3, the endless nights in the hospital, the years of therapy. She was never supposed to walk again, he said, but she kept trying. Even after everything, even after this woman tore her down. He described the humiliation of being called a liar, of having CPS invade his home, of finding his garage defaced by neighborhood cowards. I wasn't angry, he said. I was afraid. Afraid my daughter would grow up believing the world hated her because she was born into a body that people like Ms. Mitchell couldn't understand. Ms. Burns tried to rattle him during cross. You're clearly emotional. Could it be that you're exaggerating your claims? Michael didn't blink. I would gladly trade places with my daughter. I'd take every step she's lost, every scar she carries, if it meant she didn't have to face people like your client. Burns froze. The judge looked up. A hush fell again. After the recess, Judge Reynolds leaned into the mic. This has been illuminating. I will be reviewing all evidence tonight. We reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. Karen stood. She was smiling. Again, laughing as she walked past Lily, brushing close, whispering something none of them could hear. But Lily looked up at her father and said, I want to speak tomorrow. Michael's heart jumped. Are you sure? She nodded. She lied about me. I want to show them who I really am. Jacobs was stunned. It's risky, but it could be powerful. If she's up for it, Michael knelt down beside his daughter. You don't have to do this. But Lily looked at him with quiet strength, more strength than anyone else in that building, and whispered, Yes, I do. And so, the plan changed. Tomorrow, Lily would take the stand, and the truth, her truth, would finally have a voice.